Hello and welcome to part number 2 of Charles V and the Holy Roman Empire. If you haven't seen part number 1, go give that a watch first because it makes sense to watch part number 1 first. The link is in the description of the video. Let's get into this. We left off in 1519 with a young 19-year-old who was trying to lay claim to his Spanish kingdom. To keep everyone happy, he did something he would regret for the rest of his life. He allowed Spanish ships to carry slaves from Africa to the New World in America. Now that you're all caught up, please consider liking, commenting, and most importantly, subscribing. He was the king of a semi-unified Spain along with his mother, who was mentally unstable. She even kept her husband Charles's father's dead body with her, not in a tomb, but in a semi-embalmed state. Some say she did this to keep her title as co-regent with her son, and others use it as proof of her insanity. In this time, Europe was a place where royals married royals, which meant eventually family members were marrying family members. And this meant somebody would have the right parents to legally inherit everything. This was Charles. In 1519, his grandfather on his father's side, Maximilian I, the Holy Roman Emperor, died. This meant Charles became head of the Habsburg house. He was the Archduke of Austria and all the Austrian lands were his. He was the ruler. But it also meant that the imperial throne was vacant. It wasn't a matter of a kingdom. The next in line gets the throne. The Holy Roman Emperor was elected by 7 prince-electors, all German princes, who selected Charles to be their next Holy Roman Emperor. What did this mean for our now emperor? Well, he headed a confederation of states that wasn't a real empire. He couldn't raise an army from them, nor could he tax them, but he was their ruler. He ruled half of Europe as Holy Roman Emperor, and the New World as King of Spain. To be crowned King of Germany and Holy Roman Emperor, he left Spain, and he left his teacher, Adrian, the future Pope, as regent. This quickly led to revolt in the Castilian cities. Spain was an unruly kingdom for Charles and continued to be for the pretty much history of Spain. But to make sure that he was going to become emperor, he needed to prove that he had something more than any other candidate: money. As Batman had the Joker, as Harry Potter had Voldemort, Charles had Francis I of France, who was also a candidate to become Holy Roman Emperor. Obviously, Charles won out, and this was their first political war, which would very quickly turn into very real, bloody wars. These two proud princes would come to blow in what is known as the battlefield of Europe, the Dukedom of Milan, which was in control of the French, who had overthrown the Sforza family. By 1521, the imperial and papal troops drove the French out of the dukedom and reinstalled the Sforza dynasty. I actually did a video on the Dukedom of Milan and its castle. If you want to go give that a watch, I'll leave the link in the description. In the same year, 1521, he allowed Hernan Cortes, the Spanish conquistador, to take Tenochtitlan and subjugate the great Montezuma, which led to the downfall of the Aztec Empire. In that same year, 1521, Martin Luther nailed his Protestant Reformation on a German church, which would lead to the Diet of the Worms. This Diet of the Worms created something called Protestantism, which is inside Christianity. But it also meant that Charles had to deal with half of his Germanic states changing religion from Catholic to Protestants, which divided his already multicultural empire even more. Things were only starting to get busier and busier for a now 21-year-old. Nearly 70 years before, the Ottomans conquered Constantinople. Now they were on their way to Belgrade in Serbia with their Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. For Charles, this wasn't just another army coming closer to his lands, but in the eyes of a Renaissance Christian monarch, it was the very Antichrist knocking at his door. Now the young emperor needed guidance more than ever, and he looked to his teacher Adrian, who had his ambitions of his own. Using his connections with the Holy Roman Emperor and his own will, he became Bishop of Rome as Pope Adrian VI. Back then, all Christian kings bowed their head to the Pope, as they believed, as many Christians believe today, that the Pope had direct contact to God. Charles could use his connection to the new pope to gain both political and spiritual inspiration. Only this didn't last long, because next year in 1523 Adrian died and Pope Clement VII took the papacy. Remember that name, Clement VII. It will come up later. At the same time, a bunch of imperial knights in Germany started to revolt against Charles, causing a war. The knights weren't happy with the power that the Holy Roman Emperor had, and they wanted to regain the power to tax their peasantry. The peasantry weren't happy with this, and they decided to have a revolt against the aristocrats that they were working for. This led to the death of 300,000 peasants. Charles was the one that had to work on both sides with the aristocrats and the peasants. And by 1525, in the end, he would enforce better working conditions for the peasants and made sure that the nobles had to abide by this. This is a significant moment. It's the very first time that someone had ever enforced human rights. Charles was a busy man, and it wasn't going to stop for him. Francis I decided that he wanted to take his dukedom of Milan back, and he launched a successful campaign against the Sforza dynasty, who were really just puppet rulers that Charles put in place. This led to months of fighting. Charles and Francis finally met at the Battle of Pavia. A decisive victory was won by Charles here, who took Francis as prisoner. Apparently both Christian kings went to the Duomo of Milan and prayed for all the lives that were lost. Now he had his enemy, Francis, in prison. And Charles decided he wanted to look after his unruly kingdom of Spain a little bit better. One way to do this was through political marriage. In 1526, he married Isabella of Portugal, strengthening his connections to the Iberian Peninsula and, most importantly, gaining more armies in that area. Charles and Francis, although they were enemies, they were both Christian kings, and it led them to realize that they weren't too dissimilar from each other. They were both great princes and they wanted the best for their kingdoms. This led Charles to allow France to sign something called the Treaty of Madrid, which would see Francis being exchanged for his two sons. This wasn't an uncommon practice back then. Yes, it was a way to humiliate the loser, but it was also a way to strengthen the ties and understanding between the victor and the loser, in this case, the two royal households. Francis wasn't the biggest fan of Charles, so he went to the Pope, Clement VII, he's back. And Clement VII felt that Charles was starting to dominate Italy and take too much influence upon the Catholic Church. Clement and Francis then made something called the Anti-Habsburg League of Cognac, which was France, Venice, Florence, the Papal States, and Milan. Milan had decided that they wanted to revolt against France and change sides, because they were pretty confused on which side they should be on. Classic Italians. This led Charles to getting quite angry, especially because he had just released Francis from his imprisonment. He was now at war against an organization that he felt he represented. He was at war against the papacy, the Pope. A year later, in 1527, Charles did something that had not been done in hundreds of years and has never happened since. He marched with his enormous army of Germans, Italians, and Spanish and sacked Rome, forcing Clement VII to run to the castle of Sant'Angelo after his Swiss guard were massacred on the steps of the Vatican. In that same year, 1527, he became a father for the first time. Isabel gave birth to Philip in Spain. Charles had an heir, someone who would take over his throne when he was gone. He came to see the child and stayed a little while with his wife, but in 1528, it was straight back to war when Francis decided to attack another of Charles's kingdoms, Napoli, Naples. Ultimately, Charles won here as well. He was delighted because with victory, he was given another heir, the spare, when Isabel gave birth to Maria, Charles's second child, in 1528. But as per usual, it was straight back to war when the French attacked northern Italy states, a place called Landerino. And Charles would eventually beat back the French, but he was getting quite sick and tired of being the defender, and he decided to go on the offensive. When he sieged Florence, once more, he would find victory. He used this as a way to get the Pope to sign the Treaty of Barcelona and switch sides so he would join him. He also started to talk to the Pope about getting crowned King of Rome. He was crowned King of Rome in 1530 at his coronation in Bologna, and he would be the last person to ever be crowned by a pope. Join me for part number 3 next week, where we will see more wars with France and the entering of what Charles saw as the Antichrist, when the Ottomans attacked Charles Habsburg's homeland, Austria, in the siege of Vienna. I really hope you enjoyed that. Like, comment, subscribe,